In the United States, you can assassinate the president, but don't mess with the Navy SEALs. Not only because they are all brave and good at fighting, but also because they can survive in extremely harsh environments. What is more commendable is that they always put the lives of their teammates above their own safety. If a team member encounters an accident, everyone will go out in full force for revenge. In June 2005, just to rescue a captured team member, the Navy SEALs cooperated with the 160th Aviation Regiment to carry out a siege-style attack on the rampant Taliban militants. During the operation, they were so angry that they even used the air gunboat AC-130 to carry out a devastating bombardment of the enemy area with a 105mm howitzer. The reason why the teammates were captured was that when they were performing the mission, they released the Taliban disguised as ordinary villagers for humanitarian reasons. In the end, one person was captured and 19 special forces were killed. It can be said that this was the most devastating operation in the history of the Navy SEALs. Originally, this was just a simple infiltration and reconnaissance mission. 3 days ago, the U.S. military stationed in Afghanistan learned the hiding place of Ahmed, the leader of the Taliban, based on reliable intelligence. Because the other party was extremely vicious, they burned, killed, looted, and attacked a U.S. military base. So the Navy SEALs decided to immediately send a 4-person reconnaissance team to collect intelligence. After formulating an action plan, they carefully checked all the equipment. Then 2 Chinook transport planes, under the cover of Apache armed helicopters, landed at the first designated location at night. After carefully completing the reconnaissance of the surrounding situation and a comprehensive inspection of the communication equipment, the 4-person team immediately set off for the observation point. In order not to attract the attention of the other party, they had to walk for at least 8 hours in the rugged mountains where venomous snakes frequently appeared and poisonous ivy was everywhere. Fortunately, they were well-trained and successfully arrived at the designated destination with their extraordinary wisdom and physical strength. However, after arriving, they found that they could only see half of the enemy area, which was extremely unfavorable for the execution of the mission. So, Captain Michael decided to move to another higher hill. The wide view here not only allowed them to see the entire village clearly, but also quickly locked the target mission based on the appearance characteristics and took clear photos. When the signalman intended to report these situations to the base, he found that the signal here was very unstable and could not communicate with the base effectively at all. Because the vegetation here was sparse, it was easy to expose the position, so the 4 people could only retreat to the woods below to hide. While they rested and recovered their strength, they patiently waited for the signal connection. The towering mountains stood silently, and the cicadas kept chirping in the summer afternoon. The soldiers who were exhausted and tense just relaxed a little and were ready to fall asleep. Danny, who was in charge of the alert, first discovered a flock of sheep, followed by 3 shepherds, including an elderly and 2 young shepherds. All personnel immediately entered a state of high alert. In order to avoid alerting the other party, the team members tried to conceal their whereabouts as much as possible. Despite the strict concealment measures, Michael was accidentally stepped on the foot by one of the shepherds. The sudden touch caused the shepherd to be frightened and immediately turned around and fled the scene. To prevent the situation from escalating further, all the team members were forced to appear in public and took quick action to control the 3 shepherds. Later, a walkie-talkie was found on the old man, which indicated that they were most likely members of the Taliban. However, after inspection, it was found that these people did not carry any weapons, so the team could not take action against them and had to ask for instructions from the base command center. But at this time, their communication equipment still did not work properly. With no choice, the team could only risk using the satellite phone to communicate. After some efforts, they finally succeeded in contacting the base. However, unfortunately, when the call was received, the base commander was resting in his room. The subordinate had to run to inform the commander urgently, but when he arrived, the satellite phone signal had been completely interrupted. At this time, the commander also realized the trouble because according to the subordinate's report, the 4-man team had missed 2 communication windows. They had said before when deploying the strategy that it was normal for the signal in the mountains to be poor. But if the contact was not made within the specified time for more than 2 times, a rapid reaction force, as well as Apache and Black Hawk armed helicopters, must be dispatched for support. But the bad thing is that all the manpower and weapons at this time were temporarily transferred to another more difficult battlefield. This situation shows that the 4-man team will have to rely on their own strength to deal with the difficulties. After completely losing contact with the base, a fierce dispute broke out within the 4-man team. Because there are 3 choices before them. One is to let the 3 shepherds go, and the team will quickly evacuate to a safe place and return to the base after the mission is completed. But if these 3 people are Taliban spies, they will call more Taliban in a short time so that their team will be in danger. The second option is to tie the shepherds in place and evacuate, but they are likely to be eaten by hungry wolves or freeze to death due to the low temperature in the mountains at night. The third option is to directly kill the 3 shepherds and continue the mission, but if their bodies are found, the Taliban will publicize it to the Afghan media. The American media will also hold on to it and report a lot of atrocities committed by the US military. Several members of the team will be sent to a military court, but Danny and Matt still insist on using the third option, because they can see from their eyes that these 3 shepherds are trained soldiers, not ordinary Afghan villagers. To put it another way, even if they kill these people by mistake, they are not afraid, because between the so-called reputation and survival, the latter is obviously more important. However, Marcus, who is soft-hearted by nature, firmly opposes this decision. A fierce dispute broke out between the 2 sides. In the end, Captain Michael made a prompt decision to release the shepherds and immediately led the team to another mountaintop. Given that the terrain on the top of the mountain is open and the communication signal is more stable, once contact is successfully established and connected to the command center, we will immediately apply to terminate the current mission and withdraw to the base. As soldiers, strict military discipline is above all else, so all the team members had no objection. In this way, they followed the order to release the shepherd. When they arrived at the top of the mountain they had just seen, they found that it was just a fake peak and the real peak was still farther away. The radio still couldn't contact the base here, even the satellite phone had no signal, and there was no sight of the village here. For safety reasons, they could only retreat down to the woods to hide. They planned to walk back after dark, but not long after they retreated to the woods. They found movement in the surrounding woods, and a large number of Taliban came to the hills not far away. Faced with this desperate situation full of dangers, the SEAL team, which had no way to retreat, could only be 100% alert and be ready to fight at any time. As Marcus successfully killed the first enemy, the fierce battle between the 4-member SEAL team and the 200-man Taliban force was fully launched. Although the SEAL team temporarily suppressed the enemy's offensive with its precise shooting skills and efficient results of 1 shot per person. But in the face of a situation where the few are fighting against the many, there is no chance of winning if a protracted war is fought. Therefore, it is necessary to find a way to break through as soon as possible. At this time, Captain Michael decided to use the peeling tactic. The key to this tactic is that one person quickly moves to the end of the team under the cover of teammates. After success, they will cover the movement of another team member together, and the whole team will roll to one side like a track until they lose contact with the enemy. At the beginning, with the skilled cooperation of teammates, the breakout operation went very smoothly. However, when Danny tried to establish contact with the command center through the radio and request fire support, unfortunately, he was hit by an enemy stray bullet, causing several fingers to be blown off, and the whole palm was instantly bleeding. At the same time, Matt's shoulder was also hit. The enemy relied on the large number of people and did not compete with shooting skills and rushed up directly to engage in hand-to-hand combat. At this time, the teammates had no time to take care of the side because there were enemies attacking from all directions. Fortunately, Matt's physical fitness was strong, and he still defeated the enemy despite being shot in the shoulder. Seeing that the casualties were relatively severe, the Taliban directly set up a heavy machine gun and began to fire, suppressing and covering the attack of their companions with powerful firepower. At this time, the entire team was attacked from both sides and could only use their rich combat experience to resist tenaciously. But facing the enemy forces from all directions, the defeat of the team was already a matter of time. They had to evacuate to the right side, where the firepower was relatively weak, but who knew that the enemy launched a fierce attack again as soon as they stood up. In a flash, all 4 of them were injured to varying degrees. Some were shot in the thigh, and some were shot in the buttocks. Seeing that the battle situation was becoming more and more critical, they had no choice but to throw smoke bombs to try to slow down the enemy's offensive rhythm, but the enemy did not leave them any breathing space at all. Then they fired RPGs at the smoke-filled area. At this time, they were completely unable to compete with the Taliban. In front of them was the Taliban's intensive fire suppression, and behind them was a cliff. In this desperate situation where they were in a dilemma and their lives were unpredictable, the team resolutely jumped off the cliff after destroying the radio station that was basically scrapped. Then, they began to fall tragically without any protection. Some people directly hit the jagged boulders, and some people's equipment was scattered all over the ground. Some people rolled down from the dead trees, and some people hit the big trees hard to stop their bodies. When they stopped completely, their bones were almost broken. Even so, they still climbed up again with their unyielding will and gathered together again. Such a tragic way of going down the mountain also gave them a brief respite. However, before they could discuss countermeasures, the Taliban, who were familiar with the terrain, quickly caught up with them. Because there were too many enemies and they had no advantage in attacking from a low position, they could only hide behind the rocks and passively take the beating. They had no choice but to continue retreating into the woods. The 4 injured people could not avoid the dense rain of bullets from the enemy. While running, Danny, who was already burdened, was hit in the leg again and completely lost the ability to move. Seeing this, Michael had to drag him to continue retreating. After a period of retreat, they came to the next hillside. They also got a brief respite again. At this time, they were all injured, but the communication was still not restored. Because they lost their backpacks during the retreat, they lacked the necessary first aid supplies and had to temporarily fill the gunshot wounds with mud for emergency treatment. Who would have thought that the men who were still high-spirited and unyielding in the contest of wisdom and courage yesterday were now struggling? The young men who were full of hope and laughing about their life events yesterday may never see the sunrise tomorrow. In fact, death is not a terrible thing for the frontline soldiers in the midst of gunfire and rain of bullets. However, as long as there is a glimmer of hope, they will never give up easily. Therefore, when the Taliban came again, even if the only way out was a steeper cliff, the SEALs still jumped down without hesitation. However, when Marcus and Matt jumped off the cliff one after another, it was Michael's turn to help the seriously injured Danny to get up, and the enemy's bullets poured down like a torrential rain. Because the two were standing on the edge of the cliff at this time, Michael was hit by a bullet and lost his balance and fell off the cliff in the face of the sudden attack. Danny, who was left there, was also seriously injured and almost torn. On his deathbed, the 25-year-old Danny thought of his wife. Originally, his wife was a very gentle woman, but recently her temperament suddenly changed. Not only was she always anxious to change houses, but she also made many unreasonable decoration requests. The teammates who learned about this speculated that she might be pregnant. Although he kept denying it at the time, Danny couldn't help but feel happy in his heart, because he always wanted to have the fruit of his love with his wife. However, lying on the rock at this moment, Danny could only watch as all his belongings, even the wedding ring that his wife put on him, were looted by the Taliban. At this moment, Danny hoped that this was just a nightmare, because he didn't want his child to be born without a father. But no matter what the truth was, he had no chance to know. On the other side, the 3 people who jumped off the cliff again experienced a tragic death roll. This time, the large amount of rocks on the cliff made them fall more miserably than last time. After they stopped completely, the 3 of them had fractures of varying degrees. Even though they were already covered in bruises, and the Taliban, who were chasing them quickly, continued to fire RPGs at them. They were still unwilling to give up Danny, who was left behind. In the end, Michael decided that he and Marcus would go around from the side. However, the opponent's firepower was too strong, leaving them no chance to show their heads. Halfway through the journey, they were forced to terminate the action plan. But Michael cleverly discovered that if they went up a distance, they might be able to find satellite signals. Once he got the signal, he could seek support from the command center, but this trip would be a life-or-death struggle. Michael was obviously ready to die, so before he set off, he left all the bullets on his body to Marcus beside him. Then he left his sentence saying never give up the fight and turned to climb towards the target. Although the distance was too far, Matt at the bottom of the cliff didn't know that the plan had changed. But when he saw Michael changed his route, he quickly adjusted his tactics and continued to cover the firepower for the 2 people above. In this way, with the tacit cooperation of the 3 people, Michael successfully came to an open rock under the rain of bullets. Then he took out the satellite phone and dialed the command center's number in an encrypted manner. Although the signal was still intermittent, fortunately the 2 sides finally got in touch. Before the enemy arrived, Michael also told the approximate location of the trapped and the air support he needed in time. After completing the last mission, Michael, who was only 1 breath left, wanted to raise his gun and continue fighting, because this has become an instinct engraved in the blood of soldiers. But when he just stood up, his back was directly pierced by several bullets. At this moment, he was kneeling on the ground because he was unable to support himself, facing the direction of his hometown. There were not only his elderly parents, but also his newly married wife. He had promised to give his wife a war horse as a wedding gift. For this reason, Michael has been trying to save money and worrying about it day and night. But now he is destined to break his promise, and the hometown that once raised him has now become the other side that he can never reach again. The dead are really dead, but the living are not necessarily really alive. Just like Matt was still breathing, but he saw the coming of death. He said to Marcus meaningfully, "In the future you must tell my wife how much I love her. But please don't be sad because of my departure, because I feel very fulfilled to die with my brothers in battle." Originally, Marcus wanted to comfort him, "We will definitely not die." But before he could finish his words, the enemy's artillery fire exploded in his ears again. In order to disperse the firepower, the two had to act separately, but they were soon besieged again. At the critical moment, 2 transport planes full of support personnel appeared in the sky like gods. Seeing the dawn, the 2 people also shouted excitedly. However, when the rescue team on one of the transport planes was about to land on the ground for support, suddenly a rocket launcher attacked them, and then the helicopter fell directly off the cliff and broke into pieces in an instant. All 16 support personnel inside also died with the transport plane. It turned out that when the rescue team set out, they were told that the Apache helicopter responsible for cover might not be able to return in time because it was out on other missions. According to regulations, the transport plane cannot take off without firepower cover, let alone risk approaching the battlefield. But because the commander was eager to save people, he still applied for the transport plane to set off first. If the Apache cannot be in place on time, the rescue operation will be temporarily terminated. But when the transport plane really arrived at the scene, even if the commander was clearly informed that the Apache could not arrive, he was unwilling to give up. Unexpectedly, it brought even more serious losses. Although unwilling, for the sake of the overall situation, the other transport plane had to be forced to return. The rescue operation was declared a failure. The hope that Matt and Marcus had just ignited was extinguished in an instant. The two were once again trapped in a desperate situation of isolation and helplessness. What's worse is that Matt, who was exposed in the wilderness, was hit by several bullets due to a direct encounter with 2 Taliban. Although he escaped the first wave of attacks with his tenacious willpower, he was too tired to resist. In the end, after firing 2 pistol magazines, he died under the enemy's gun. At this time, Marcus was still desperately calling Matt, trying to get in touch with him. Unexpectedly, he attracted the attention of the Taliban, and a huge explosion directly caused him to fall from above. The enemy who followed closely behind quickly caught up. Fortunately, there was a huge rock next to Marcus. In order to avoid the enemy's sight, he quickly hid in it. At this time, the Apache helicopter came to support. Although the appearance of the helicopter forced the Taliban to retreat temporarily, there was no sign of target movement, and the helicopter was running out of fuel from another battlefield. After circling several times, the Apache helicopter had to leave directly. Marcus, who missed the rescue again, looked at the last hope and fell into endless pain and despair. But Marcus soon lost consciousness and fell asleep due to the high load on his body. He didn't wake up until the next morning because he had been in a highly nervous state yesterday. So, even though he was covered with wounds, he didn't feel any pain. But at this moment, Marcus looked at the bullets that penetrated his body and felt as if his whole body was about to fester. However, now is not the time to feel sorry for himself, because the Taliban may come back at any time. Before that, he must leave quickly and find a safer hiding place. To facilitate his movements, he endured the severe pain and pressed the exposed leg bone to reset. Then he dragged his severely injured left leg and struggled forward in the valley. The towering mountains stood majestically, as if they were hiding all kinds of crises. Fortunately, Marcus was lucky. Not only did he not encounter enemies and beasts, but he also saw a clear stream. He had not eaten or drunk for a whole day and night, and he dived into the water to breathe like a fish about to die of thirst. But at this moment, 4 strangers suddenly appeared, and the frightened Marcus immediately took out a grenade, threatened them not to get close, or they would die together. But the 4 people were not afraid, but instead extended a helping hand to him. Marcus did not believe them, but heard the Taliban coming to search getting closer and closer. Seeing the pure eyes of the little boy in front of him, Marcus finally chose to believe them. So he was taken to a nearby village by everyone. The residents of this village always abide by the Pashtun law and firmly believe that they have the responsibility to protect every individual from the enemy. Because of this, they have been fighting against the vicious Taliban for generations. But they have also paid many lives for this. Marcus thought he would be safe here, but soon the Taliban tracked him down here based on the bloodstains on the ground. Although the man who saved him wanted to stop him, he had no way to compete with the armed Taliban. He could only watch Marcus being dragged to a piece of bloody wood. On this inconspicuous piece of wood, the villagers saw countless heads cut off by the brutal Taliban. I thought Marcus would not be spared this time, but unexpectedly, a group of armed villagers arrived in time at the critical moment. Because the villagers had an absolute advantage in weapons and numbers, several Taliban thugs were forced to retreat in the end. Marcus was able to escape again. But because the incident happened suddenly, the whole village had to gather together to discuss the next response. Therefore, only one little boy could be left to take care of Marcus, who was seriously injured. In order to cut his clothes and remove the bullet from his body, Marcus urgently needed a sharp knife. However, the little boy did not understand English, so he could only communicate with difficulty through gestures. Finally, the little boy walked out of the door as if he understood it. As a result, he carefully brought a duck, just because the pronunciation of duck here is very similar to the English word knife. Marcus felt deeply powerless when he saw the scene, but fortunately the man who saved him came back at this time. However, when the man understood Marcus's needs and took the knife from the kitchen, he aimed it directly at the duck in the little boy's arms. If Marcus had not stopped it in time, the innocent duck would have suffered a tragic throat cut for just 1 second. After a small episode of poor communication, Marcus got the knife as he wished and cut open the skin and flesh without anesthesia. He peeled out the bullet stuck inside and the huge fragment inserted into the thigh root. But he fainted from the pain as soon as he finished. During the time he was sleeping, the man not only helped him treat the wound, but also changed him into clean clothes. When he woke up in the evening, he was given water and food. However, just when they were enjoying a moment of peace, the Taliban launched a surprise attack with more people and more weapons. In this struggle with a huge disparity in strength, the casualties were heavy and retreated step by step. Marcus, who was alone, was also discovered by a Taliban and was brutally treated violently by him. Just when he was about to be strangled to death, the little boy handed him a knife in time. Then Marcus forced his body to stab the knife into the enemy's chest. In order to ensure that the target was completely incapable of action, he carried out multiple fatal attacks in succession. At this time, the battle outside was getting more and more intense, and the villagers were about to collapse. Several U.S. helicopters suddenly flew over and locked onto the Taliban and opened fire. It turned out that when Marcus first arrived in the village, he asked the villagers to send a letter for help to the base command center. It was because of the villagers' overnight trek that the reinforcements arrived in time. Before being carried away by his comrades, Marcus sincerely thanked the people who saved him and the little boy who had always been with him. After a life-and-death experience, Marcus finally got on the plane home. However, due to excessive blood loss, he had a short respiratory arrest when he was sent to the hospital. Fortunately, after timely rescue, his heart started beating again. In fact, according to Marcus' later recollection, part of his life had long died on the mountain with the other 3 comrades. But it was also because of his dead comrades that he desperately wanted to continue living, because only if he lives, the dead will not be forgotten. After experiencing this ordeal, no matter what danger he encounters later, no matter how dark the abyss he falls into, he is no longer confused or afraid. He will never give up fighting again. Lone Survivor is directed by Peter Berg, starring Mark Wahlberg, a biographical film released in 2013. This film is adapted from Marcus Rattle's memoir of the same name in the Red Wings operation on June 28, 2005. For Navy SEALs were sent to the Taliban's lair for advanced reconnaissance. As a result, they met 3 shepherds on the way. Although they knew there was a risk of exposure, the reconnaissance team let them go for humanitarian reasons. Unexpectedly, a large number of Taliban armed forces were attracted, and a transport plane responsible for rescue crashed during this operation. All 16 aid workers on the plane died, including 8 Navy SEALs, and only Marcus was among the 4 scouts. He survived with the help of Afghan villagers, but the villager Gulab who saved him is still being hunted by the Taliban. For this reason, he has been on the run. Gulab also applied for a U.S. green card, but was rejected by the U.S. government. 3 years after the accident, Ahmed, the target of Operation Red Wings in 2008, was killed. In the same year, the United States named a new missile destroyer Michael Murphy, in memory of the heroic Captain Michael, of course, in addition to Michael and Marcus who survived. People should also remember the other Navy SEALs who also died in the operation. Well, today's movie sharing ends here. Welcome everyone to like, comment, and forward. Thank you for your patience. Looking forward to meeting you next time.